I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the doorway holding a paper bag of groceries that I had paid for again and listened as my mother told me I was ungrateful. Her name is Nancy Monroe. She has this way of speaking that's sharp even when she's calm, but that day, she wasn't calm. "You're ungrateful," she said, her voice rising over the quiet hum of the refrigerator. "Get out, and don't bother coming back." My father, Daniel Monroe, stood a few steps behind her, leaning against the kitchen counter. He didn't say a word, didn't look at me, just kept rubbing the bridge of his nose like the conversation was giving him a headache. And Eli, my younger brother by 3 years, didn't even glance up from the couch. He was still in sweatpants at 3 p.m., phone in hand, acting like none of this had anything to do with him. It was a Sunday. I had come straight from work. The grocery bag was heavy with staples, bread, eggs, milk, things they always forgot to buy. I brought them every week quietly like a routine no one noticed, but everyone expected. I looked around the living room one last time. The same carpet I had vacuumed since I was a teenager. The same dent on the wall from when Eli broke the frame and blamed the wind. And I remember thinking, is this what it takes to finally not be needed anymore? So I left. No one stopped me. Not even my father. Not even the boy I once called my little brother. I moved out at 17. Not because I hated home not then, but because I knew I wouldn't survive if I stayed. My parents loved to say they raised me right, but what they really meant was that I raised myself. Quietly, so they didn't have to. We weren't poor, not exactly, but there was always this edge to everything. Bills came late. Groceries ran thin near the end of the month. The electricity flickered sometimes, not because of a storm, but because no one had paid the bill yet. I got my first job at a diner on Route 18 the summer after 10th grade. Hostess at first. Boaser when they were short. Then server even when I wasn't old enough to legally carry a bottle of beer. No one asked. No one cared. My mom didn't drive me. My dad didn't pick me up late at night. But they sure did sigh loudly when I kept my tips in a jar labeled college. By senior year, I was doing homework at 2 a.m. between double shifts. I still graduated with honors, still got a full scholarship to state. No one from my family came to orientation or move-in day. I rented a U-Haul and drove myself. That was the pattern I handled things. They let me. Eli was different, always had been. He was the baby, their word not mine. He had asthma as a kid, mild but exaggerated. Every scraped knee was a crisis. Every failed test was the school's fault or the teacher's bias or some mystery learning disorder that never quite materialized. He dropped out of community college twice. Quit 4 jobs in a single year. Moved back home at 24 to regroup and just stayed. And somehow, through all of that, they never stopped calling him special. They told friends he was just figuring things out, that some people take longer. No one ever asked what I was figuring out. I was too busy paying bills no one else seemed to notice. The first time my mom mentioned the mortgage, she didn't say the word help. She said, "Claire, your dad and I are just stretched thin right now. Just a little short this month. That was 2 years ago." At first, I transferred a few hundred groceries, gas, some utilities. Then it was the water bill, then the electric, then the mortgage. The numbers got bigger. Their thanks got smaller. I don't even remember when I started paying the full thing. There was never a conversation. Just silence on their end and a calendar reminder on mine. Eli once joked that I had become the family's safety net. I laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a direct deposit. And still, when I walked through that door with groceries last Sunday, they looked at me like I was selfish. Like I was taking something from them, not giving. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How you can give so much for so long, that people forget it ever came from you at all. My new apartment wasn't anything special. 1 bedroom, thin walls, a creaky heater that sounded like it had opinions. But it was mine. I painted the kitchen cabinets soft blue, put a potted plant in the window that I remembered to water most days. There was no yelling, no passive-aggressive sighs. No unpaid bills slipping under my door like threats. Just quiet. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Not the shallow kind of breathing you do when you're waiting for someone to need something, the real kind. The full, heavy-lunged, nothing hangs over me kind. I slept. I cooked for one. I watched bad TV and left dishes in the sink on purpose. And you know what? No one said a word. No calls. No voicemails. Not even a text from Eli, which was its own kind of relief. My phone was silent, and that silence felt like freedom. I wasn't waiting for praise, but I thought maybe someone would ask if I was okay. They didn't. And then, 3 months later on a Tuesday, I barely remember my phone buzzed. It was a message from my father. Just one line. "Why haven't you sent the mortgage this month?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry, not surprised. Just hollow. Like someone had knocked on a door I locked for a reason. And all I could think was, of course. It was never about me. It was always about the house. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I put the phone face down on the table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat in silence. No music. No TV. Just that one message vibrating in the background like a mosquito I refused to swat. An hour passed, then another. When I finally picked it up again, there were 5 new messages. 3 from my mom, 1 from Eli, another from Dad. "Claire, the bank called. We're behind. How could you do this to us? You know we don't have that kind of money." Eli's text was the most predictable. "Are you really going to let them lose the house just to prove a point?" There it was. The guilt trip. Right on schedule. Not one of them asked how I was. Not one of them said, "We miss you." Not one of them mentioned the fact that they'd told me in those exact words, "Don't bother coming back. They didn't want me." They wanted my help. There's a difference. I could feel it like cold air slipping under the door of a house that used to be warm. I let another hour pass. Then I replied to Dad's original message. Just one line. I thought I wasn't welcome anymore. I set the phone down, and then it started. A flood. Buzz. 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 Calls. Texts. Voicemails. Like a dam breaking. Suddenly, my absence was unacceptable. Suddenly, I mattered again, but not as a daughter. No, as the only one who ever took responsibility, and the only one now refusing to. They didn't stop. That night, I turned off notifications, but the phone still lit up every few seconds like the world was ending and only I could stop it. "Claire, answer your father. He's worried sick. We raised you better than this. You're acting out of spite." Spite. That word hit harder than it should have. Not sacrifice, not support, not decade of silent giving. Spite. As if I'd withheld something they were entitled to. At midnight, Eli called. I let it ring out. Then came the voicemail, "Claire, come on. This is serious. They're freaking out. The bank's getting involved. You need to fix this. Fix this." Like I'd broken something. Like I was the one who let it all fall apart, not the one who'd held it together for years without complaint. I listened to his message twice, then deleted it. The next morning, another text from Mom. "This is tearing the family apart." And from Dad, "What kind of daughter does this to her parents?" That one made me laugh, a dry, empty laugh that echoed through my quiet kitchen. Because I could answer that question. The kind of daughter who paid your mortgage while you told your friends Eli was looking for work. The kind who skipped her own dentist appointments to keep the water running in a house she didn't live in. The kind you kicked out the moment she said no. But I didn't text any of that. Instead, I waited until the sun had fully come up, until the coffee had cooled, until the noise in my phone began to sound less like family and more like static. Then I replied, carefully, clearly, "Not my problem anymore." And this time, I didn't flinch when the calls came, because I finally understood I wasn't being cruel. I was just done. For a while, I told myself the silence was better. That not knowing was easier than confirming what I already suspected. But even silence has weight. It presses on your chest in quiet moments and whispers things you try to ignore. And eventually, that whisper becomes a question you can't unhear. Where did the money go? I had been sending money every month. On time. Without fail. For groceries. For bills. For the mortgage. They never said thank you. But they never said stop either, and I never asked for proof. Maybe that was my mistake. So one morning I did what I should have done months earlier. I called the bank. Not to confront, just to ask. A woman answered, calm, professional, with a Midwestern kindness in her voice. She asked for the mortgage account number, some security info, then put me on a brief hold. When she came back, her tone had shifted slightly. It looks like the account was delinked from your payments about 7 months ago. I blinked. Sorry, delinked, yes ma'am. The automatic payments from your account were removed. We haven't received anything from that source since. I thanked her. Asked, almost afraid to know if the payments had been made in some other way. Another pause. Then, there have been some partial payments. But the account is flagged. It's currently in pre-foreclosure status. I don't remember much after hanging up. I know I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a long time, phone in hand, heart strangely quiet. Not racing, just heavy. The kind of quiet that comes after betrayal. Not loud, just final. I opened my banking app and scrolled. Transfer after transfer, month after month, thousands of dollars, all labeled home or utilities or family support. But if the mortgage hadn't been paid, what had they done with it? Where had it gone? I thought back to the new recliner in the living room, the smart TV that showed up on sale, the groceries that suddenly seemed better stocked when I visited. I hadn't asked. I hadn't questioned. I had just given. And they had taken. I don't think it was malice. Not at first, but at some point they stopped seeing it as help and started seeing it as something they deserved. I didn't call them because I was angry. I called them because I was done guessing. And when you've given people years of silence, what you get in return isn't always truth, but it's often clarity. I started with Eli. He picked up fast, like he'd been sitting there waiting for me to cave. His voice came rushed, already defensive, already emotional. He said Mom had barely slept, that Dad had gone quiet, that the bank had called again. He made it sound like I'd lit a match and walked away from the family home without a backward glance. But none of his words landed. Not really. Because somewhere under all that panic was a tone I knew well, guilt dressed up as urgency. I waited. Let him talk. Then I asked evenly, what happened to the money I sent every month? It went quiet on his end, not technical silence, emotional silence. The kind where someone scrambles for a version of the truth that doesn't make them look worse than they already feel. He said they'd used it for groceries, repairs, things that came up. He said it like I was being unreasonable for asking, but I'd lived there. I knew the size of that mortgage, and I knew what 7 months of unpaid bills looked like. So I asked again, not louder but sharper. You knew they weren't paying the mortgage, didn't you? He didn't answer directly. He didn't have to, because if he'd truly been in the dark, he would have been shocked, upset, defensive in a different way. But instead, he sighed. That same tired, empty sigh he used when he got caught skipping class or lying about job interviews. A sigh that said, yeah, and I hoped you'd never ask. I thanked him not out of kindness, but out of finality. Then I hung up. Later that night, my phone rang again. It was Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. I picked up. Her voice was tight, the kind of forced calm she used when she knew she was in the wrong, but would never say it out loud. She said I had embarrassed them by calling the bank. Said I was making things worse. Said families don't handle things like this. And for the first time in a long time, I let her speak. Because I wanted to hear exactly how far she'd go to avoid saying, "We lied to you." Eventually, Dad took the phone. His voice was lower, almost soft. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask why I was upset. He just asked if I would help them catch up. Just this once. Just until they figured something out. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. They weren't sorry. They were scared. And scared people don't apologize, they negotiate. So I told him without pause, "Sell the house." There was a beat of silence, then 2 voices layered in disbelief. "You don't mean that. This is still your home." But it wasn't. And maybe it never had been. The next morning I woke to a wall of notifications. Texts, voicemails, missed calls, some desperate, some angry, a few pretending to be calm. I didn't open any of them. I already knew what they would say, that I was cruel, that I was heartless, that I'd turned my back on family, but I hadn't. They turned their backs the moment I was no longer useful. I made a fresh cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, watched the steam curl upward while the phone buzzed across the counter like it was shaking with guilt I refused to carry. Then I opened our old group thread, the one we used to plan birthdays, reminders, grocery lists I always ended up paying for. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a dramatic exit. I just changed the group name from family to closed account, muted it, archived it. Then I deleted their numbers. Not in anger, not even in sadness. In clarity. Because when someone shows you that your presence only matters when tied to what you give, the most generous thing you can do is leave. On my counter, I noticed a white envelope, still sealed. My name on the front in my mother's handwriting. She must have dropped it off the day they still thought I'd come back. I held it, considered opening it, then placed it in the trash. No drama, no message, just paper, letting go. And in that moment, with no one watching, no one clinging, no one calling me selfish, I felt something I hadn't in years, weightless. I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because they only loved the version of me that kept paying the bills and never asked questions. And when that version stopped showing up, so did their idea of family. Some people hear that and think it's cold, but there's nothing cold about protecting the parts of yourself no one else ever bothered to care for. I don't need them to understand. I just need them to stop pretending they ever saw me at all. Because I was there, every day, every month, until I wasn't. And now they can finally feel the silence they spent years pretending wasn't mine. If you've ever stayed too long in a place that only wanted what you could give, just leave a "that's all." You don't need to explain. Some of us already understand.